Hello, welcome to Free Will, Science, and Religion. I'm Chandler Klebs, and I'm here with David Joseph, Jamie Soden, and George Ortega. And our topic for today is realizing that we can't blame others or ourselves, because what a lot of people miss is that people flip flop. Whenever, average people who believe in free will, who don't understand that nobody has a free will, they tend to blame others for doing things they consider immoral. But when they themselves do something, well, then they justify it and say, "Oh, I had no choice. I had to do this, and it was right for me to do this." And what's so interesting about it is that even for those of us who understand that nobody is truly to blame or are fundamentally responsible for anything they do, well, we still, it might be easier for us to apply it to ourselves more than other people, or other people more than ourselves. Such like, for example, it might be easier to perhaps I think it's easier for most of us to apply it to ourselves, realizing that we don't have a free will, just because we're more aware of the causes of our own behavior, because we know ourselves, we have our memories, uh, but we don't know the history of other people, and therefore that's part of the illusion, is that we think other people choose things out of nothing, and that therefore we still tend to blame them more, even when we logically understand why free will is impossible by causality or acausality, if that was even possible.
Chandler, yeah, there's another component to this. In other words, what you just said makes sense. It's easier than others than ourselves for things, but there's another factor. For example, let's say I've got an apartment, and a lot of times I won't keep it straightened up for myself, but if I'm going to have neighbor or visitors, I will straighten up for them. So in other words, I think sometimes we give more deference to others than we give to ourselves. So like in this case, we might actually be better able to understand that other people aren't culpable because they don't have a free will, then understand that we're not culpable. Because I think the other part is that like we still have to hold ourselves responsible. We're moral creatures, and even though we know we don't have a free will, we still want to do the right thing. So sometimes I think that adds a level of complexity in our, you know, basically absolving ourselves for what we do wrong. Yeah.
Oh, okay. Let me see if I make sure I understand this. That we still hold ourselves responsible, even though we know we're not.
Well, in the sense that, yeah, in other words, we know actions have consequences. We know that, like, nobody has a free will, but, for example, if we're not careful, if we're walking through the woods and we're not, like, being responsible in terms of taking care, then, we might fall and trip and hurt ourselves. So this is kind of like an example of morality,
That is
relative
village.
to, like, self-preservation so,
Yeah.
like, so we always have that in mind that, like, with
Mm.
we're another person, we're not really responsible for their moral behavior. So sometimes it's easier to absolve them of what they've done, knowing they don't have a free will, than absolving ourselves because we have to add the additional component that we have to, like, we have a conscience nonetheless, and we still want to do what's right.
Right.
Which I mean, you want to tell people not to do this and that and third because it will have ramifications in the future. I mean, you got to tell someone that if they do this, then there's a possibility that it could come back on them in some way through the form of retribution. I'd still warn the individuals, not to do certain things, um, not just because it's immoral, but also due to the fact that uh, it could come back on them. You know.
Yeah, and what's interesting about this is some people term this idea of being careful and thinking about consequences of actions. A lot of people call that responsibility. And I think that is what gets confusing, because that kind of being responsible in the sense of thinking about what you do and what's right, being responsible in that sense, is different from actually being responsible as being to blame or credit for something.
That's a great point, Chandler. Yeah.
Yeah, what's interesting about it is because the word responsible is used in two completely different senses, that's why I'm so confused.
Yeah, I'll put the words blame and responsibility in two different categories. I'll put them in fundamental and pragmatic. A bit like what Nick Vale was saying to George a while back. We still have to hold people pragmatically responsible to deter them from doing harmful things in future, don't we, George?
Absolutely. That you made the distinction, exactly. This came about in our meetup yesterday. Basically, fundamentally, nobody's responsible for anything because we have a free will. Nobody's fundamentally responsible. But of course, in order to uphold our society and our civilization, we for ourselves have to assume pragmatic responsibility, and we have to hold others pragmatically accountable or pragmatically responsible, not in the sense of blame, but identifying them and identifying ourselves as the agents, not the free agents, but the agents of what we do.
Yeah, you make a good point. We have to stop the vessels that are doing the harm, but we're not gonna say the vessels have an evil soul that they're gonna burn in hell for eternity just because um, they went insane and shot a couple of people. You know what I mean? Because fundamentally, it wasn't up to them. Their faulty genes and their environment is what made them in the first place. Torture and eternity makes no sense, does it? So.
Yeah, this is very interesting because there's this idea that you identify the most recent cause or proximate cause of a problem, um, but it's about correcting a problem, such as when somebody does something harmful and they're fired from their job for it because they did something really really bad. Yeah, for example, like let's just say that you have an employee of some company who is caught stealing stuff. Well, obviously, they're not going to just let that continue. They're going to probably call the police. The person will probably go to jail or and probably be made to pay back if possible what they stole. But it doesn't mean like what Jamie said. It doesn't mean that they are deserving of any punishment, especially eternal hellfire or something like that.
Yeah, eternal punishment for a finite offense of all things. You know what I
Dave,
mean?
David,
Because
what's your take on this? I mean, is it easier for you to like absolve others because they don't have a free will of the wrong they do, or is it easier to absolve yourself?
It's definitely easier for me to absolve others. I mean, with myself, I'm more liable to hold myself more accountable. I'm not entirely sure why that is. Probably, I don't know. Probably because I can see the reasons more clearly, and if you can see the reasons to why you're doing something that you don't want to do, you can kind of beat yourself up about it.
yeah,
Well,
because when I look back on the stuff that I regret doing, I kind of get upset about it, George. You know what I mean? Bad things that I said about my mother that I didn't mean. I said mean things about my grandfather that I didn't mean. I should have kept my mouth shut and stuff. Yeah.
no, because David, that's paradoxical. Because on the one hand, you're right. We know
Yeah,
the reasons for why we do things, and that's why we blame ourselves. It's harder to absolve ourselves. But on the other hand, right, knowing the reasons should also tell us that they're not up to us.
it should indeed. But I wish I could tell you what was going on. If I knew what was going on, I would be able to get things done a bit better and not blame myself for it.
Yeah, I'm kind of like that myself, David. I mean, you're not alone there. I do blame myself for some stuff I've done, George. You know what I mean?
And I think, yeah, the general theme in this is like whether it's us who are like kind of like pioneering this revolution in human thought, or people like who will eventually get this. This is going to take a while. This might take 10, 20, 30 years for people to get it well enough, and then teach their sons and daughters this, and then teach it in school, and have so many books written about it that it becomes second nature. But at this point, in this stage of like evolving our consciousness, it's one thing to understand that don't have a free will. It's another thing entirely, far more difficult to put it into practice as much as we'd like.
Yeah, it takes time to get used to this, especially when you've lived much of your life blaming yourself and others for things, thinking that everyone's responsible and that they could have chosen otherwise. And then even once you learn this new information of why it's impossible, it still takes a long time to break bad habits.
And you know what's interesting, Chandler? So, like, imagine, let's say 30 years from now, everybody has gotten it for 10 years or 15 years. Then it'll probably be just as difficult for them to attribute free will to others and act upon it as it is hard for us to not do that.
Now, wouldn't that be amazing?
Yeah, that'd be awesome.
Yeah, right now, I think there are several problems in our world that cannot be solved with the free will paradigm. It's not just that it makes it more difficult, but it's impossible under the free will paradigm. And one of those problems, is the whole issue of, yeah, for example, like we were talking in our other podcast about, the laws and the ages at which someone can drive or vote or be a politician and or whatever, and these tests, like, it's interesting. The most important issues are those issues where people have all sorts of blame heaped on them. It's like this happens. It is with the vegetarians versus the carnivores. This happens in religion debates. This happens in politics all the time. People are blaming somebody and like, you're the problem, and you're the problem here. And they're blaming other people while ignoring even what they're doing wrong. But it would be easier if they understood nobody's really to blame and then work on solving the problem, whether it's with themselves or others. Man, things would get the progress would be made.
Yeah, because the arguments I've had with my mother, Chandler, like one of the hateful things I said to my mother when I got angry at her, I said, burn in hell or stuff like that. I wished I never said those things, but it's kind of like, when I think about the free will issue that you talk about, and when I think about what I shouldn't have done, I think to myself, I'll stop making excuses. You shouldn't have done that, blah blah blah, and I completely forget the domino effect kind of thing, um, where these things are kind of meant to happen in a way, George. If you get what I mean. I mean,
Absolutely.
I guess I
And
couldn't have stopped it,
and
but
here's the thing, Jamie. Yeah, there's absolutely nothing you just said something wrong to
mm,
whomever, to your mom or whomever. So like you understand that you're not to blame for it, and this is very important because like you know we all want to be happy. Happiness is the main goal in life, and there are four personality traits that are most correlated with happiness, and self-esteem happens to be one of them. And
mm,
self-esteem, to a great extent, depends upon us seeing ourselves as good people. So if we have this free will belief where every time we do wrong, we see ourselves as less than good, that's going to like impinge upon our happiness. This is another reason why this whole topic and our mission is so important to the world.
yeah, and I used to say a bunch of hateful things before I met you and Chandler. I mean, this was going back like before October, I believe. Um, I said some, wrongful things about Americans because some people in your country do destructive and harmful things. Like the Westboro Baptist Church, I mean, they represent, um, they're the epitome of why America has, such a huge problem with bigotry because they believe that some people are genuinely deserving of eternal torment,
And,
like
and
atheists.
yeah, and Jamie, they're the epitome of the harm that free will belief causes because they couldn't rationally, logically be so hateful were they not to believe in free will.
Yeah, yeah, but they're also they also represent the bigotry that America has had a history of. I mean, Britain is not perfect either. I mean, Britain has had a history of homosexuality based hatred, but it's been more pronounced in the United States. So because your population's bigger than ours, man. So
Oh no, I know.
so there's so many hate groups. You've got the KKK, you've got Westboro Baptist Church, you've got neo Nazis and all these other like disgusting groups that they even want to mention.
And it's interesting. That reflects, today, yesterday was July 4th and it celebrates freedom, right? And
Yeah,
it's kind of ironic because like sometimes I think the freedoms that we have in the United States leads to a lot of the bigotry. In other words, like, the people in Westboro Church are free to, like, to not just hold, but to express and act on these hateful beliefs. And so, this is an example, like, like belief in free will can be harmful. Sometimes, that's why we have our laws. In other words, we're not free to do anything we want because, like, basically our laws prohibit us from doing things that are harmful to others. So
Yeah.
sometimes, like, we champion freedom, forgetting that, like, sometimes, freedom allows people to do things that are just wrong.
Yeah, I do understand that part as well. I mean, I do stand up for civil rights to a degree, but then I'll step back a bit and think, well, hold on, even some words are hurtful. Like, say, if you call a black person the N word, sometimes that could be hurtful, and that might cause them to turn around and punch you in the face. You know what I mean? So
Yeah, this is part of an interesting problem, Jamie, because there's, on one hand, people talk about freedom of speech, and yet there's a lot of bad things that we don't want people to say, and so these two are in a conflict.
yeah, yeah, you got civil rights versus you know discrimination. And discrimination is certainly bad. I mean, we have laws against discrimination already. Like, if you discriminate someone for their race or gender or whatever, you can actually be prosecuted for it now. So
Yeah, it's kind of interesting because there's a lot of traditions. I mean, when you think about it, if you look at the religions that people believe in, when you look at the American history, well,
mm,
you find racism, you find nationalism, you find these things that now we consider awful, hateful, bad things. Well, that's what we're founded on. I mean, that's what's so sad about it in a way, like the fact, and like, the way the early people who started America first, they wiped out the most of the Native Americans, and they took people from Africa and to here and had them be slaves for a long time. And so racism was such a huge part of American history
yeah,
that for it,
especially in the 18th century. Yeah.
yeah, and so for it to be considered a country of freedom seems like total hypocrisy to me.
Mm. Yeah, there's a lot of contradictions in this whole idea of, like, free speech and stuff, because sometimes people hide behind the guise of free speech, but then use that to promote their religion. Like Westboro Baptist Church, I mean, they've been going on and on about, freedoms to pig at funerals. Now, how is it fair that you upset all these families with all your, with all your sadistic beliefs? You go to these, like, funerals and say that these soldiers are going to burn in hell because they were non-believers, or that they were gay, or that there was something else, and eternal torture for something so trivial. Come on.
Jamie, like, our freedom of speech laws were developed before there were newspapers, radio, mass media. In other words, like, so, like, back then it was very difficult to do a lot of harm by
Yeah,
saying anything. But in today's world, with the internet, with television stations worldwide and all that, worldwide newspapers, people can do a lot of harm by, because, like, before all this stuff, you could say it to a few people, right? But like today, somebody can say something very hateful, and it's like it impacts, thousands or tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands of people. So
yeah,
yeah, our technology, demands that we actually, recognize that not only do acts, cause harm, but speech can cause harm also. And
yeah.
this is the delicate
Send,
balance.
and that can spread. I mean, someone else can pick up the wrong message, then spread that, and yeah, it spreads like a virus, George. You're right. I mean, my hedonic imperative leads me to want, harm to come to an end. I don't want, I don't want torture brought back. I don't want the death penalty brought back in England because it's just not civil.
Yeah, it's true what George said, freedom of speech. Maybe somehow people worked it out before TV and radio and the internet. I mean, but now all it takes is for one person to say something really awful and hateful that convinces a whole bunch of other people, yeah, let's hate this group and kill them. So then people die because of the words of some person, and so all of a sudden then your speech literally translates into people being killed. So then how do you justify freedom of speech in that case, you know?
Yeah, I mean, I've been known to say like hateful things in the past as well. I've said, why doesn't a meteor come down and smash us and all that stuff? Because, when I get into a bad mood, George, right, and I hear about like bad news and stuff, I can get into a really bad mood to the point where I say, why doesn't the world just destroy itself? Then that will end all the pain. I'll say something along them lines because I just get so pissed off sometimes. You know what I mean?
Yeah,
So
and with free will belief,
yeah,
we get into a mood like that, and we just say, well, it's free will. I freely chose to get into that mood, and we actually recognize that those moods just, aren't freely chosen. But like under the free will paradigm, we basically, don't look for the reasons of why we get into those moods. So to the extent we look for the reasons, then we can like avoid them in the future.
yeah. I mean, the hedonic imperative, going towards pleasure and avoiding pain. I mean, that leads us to want to uphold morality as well, doesn't it?
Oh, absolutely, absolutely.
Yeah, because
Yeah.
because we don't want harm to come back on us. So, in order to protect society, you want people who do harm to be locked up. And I was
And
saying,
that's
and I was saying to people in the death penalty debate, right? I was saying to them, you don't need to kill people to neutralize the threat. You could just imprison them, and the threat's no more because they're in a cell. They've got guards watching them 24/7, and the only way they can get out is if someone botches the security. That's it. Yeah.
Hmm. Yeah, it's interesting, because I mean, what it really comes down to is you have, millions and even billions of people really who have the power to broadcast what they say
Yeah.
to the whole world. And that kind of power is a kind of power that would have been unheard of hundreds of years ago. There was only so much harm that could be done. Um,
But
and
with
now
now we're in a
it's,
digital age where everything's online.
yeah.
Yeah, misinformation could be spread much more quickly now, can't it, George?
Yeah, absolutely. But what you were saying before, like a lot of people are afraid that if we abandon this belief in free will, civilization is going to collapse. But it's very important
Oh
to
yeah, that's what
recognize.
Stefan King was saying to me, Chandler, and this guy called Alex on YouTube. He was saying if we abandon free will belief, then the court systems will mean nothing.
No,
And
I
I
know.
was
So like, I know.
go
So my point is that, like, like you were saying, because we're hardwired biologically to seek pleasure and avoid pain, we as a society are not going to let, civilization collapse. If people do things that are harmful, we'll understand that they won't have a free will, but we're still going to have to kind of like address it in some way because, we seek pleasure and avoid pain. We don't want to be subject to harm from them. It just makes sense.
yeah, and even from like criminals like baby killers and rapists and all that stuff. I mean, we don't want them out in society because obviously they do a lot of harm. I mean, who knows? Because of psychopaths, because these people are by definition insane, they might come after us. They might try and kill us. So why would you want that? You know, why would
Yeah,
you want the possibility that these people will come up to you with a knife or a gun and destroy you or someone you care about? You know what I mean?
I hear you.
So
Yeah. And here's the thing, guys, is people have these fears, oh, well, if we abandon this belief in free will, society will crumble. Some people say, well, if you abandon belief in a certain religion, that
mm,
society will crumble. Some people say that society is crumbling because gay marriage got legalized. It's noticed that society, look, everyone has their idea of what will crumble society, but I hate to be negative about this, but sometimes it looks like society's crumbling anyway, and that with or without free will, I don't know. I mean, we've got climate change too that we may not be able to stop. So I'm a little worried about that.
yeah, I don't think civilization would stop if we abandon free will belief. That's just a false doctrine. People are just basing that on fear, George. That's my belief on that. I think it's all based on psychology and scaremongering, man. I mean, our hedonic imperative, that alone will be enough to keep us to, it'll keep us upholding our laws. You know.
Yeah, I think it's just a scare tactic because I don't think it can actually be made any worse by reducing blame and hatred by getting rid of free will belief. It has to make it better, if anything.
Yeah, and that's what I was trying to say into debunking. We don't need to believe that people are fundamentally responsible or to blame for their actions to, lock these people up. The mere fact that we experience pain and suffering, that alone is enough to want these people locked up and kept away from other people.
Yeah, that's really all the reason that we need. We don't need to hold certain beliefs that have no basis in reality in order to avoid pain. We all avoid pain if we can, whichever way that we do that.
I mean, sure, I might get angry about like certain people I fell out with in the past. I might say hateful things about them from time to time, but the point remains, if they're not to blame, and I don't truly want them dead, because if I did want them dead, I would have killed them. You know what I mean? So there you go.
It's really not so much about hatred, what caused a lot of problems. It's mostly just fear of being hurt, and you don't want someone to hurt you, and so you'll do anything. And I think even a lot of times when somebody does kill somebody, it's not even necessarily because um, they hate the person. They just don't want that person hurting them.
But the free will believers go a step further and say these people need to be tortured, or you know, I've seen on these torture methods videos, George. I've seen people leave very disturbing comments, like they say um, they want terrorists and rapists and all that stuff. I know they're serious criminals, but they say they want retribution, and I'm thinking, what would that solve? They want to torture these people by using a rack and using, you know, crushing or burning or stuff like that. They want to put
And that's
like,
the thing, Jamie. So, like, fine. So we have to, like, use punishment as a motivator for desirable behavior and rewards also. And we have to also, like, you know, threaten punishment to act as a deterrent. But free will belief goes so far beyond that. Free will belief, they actually did an experiment. They had one group that believed in free will, the other that didn't, or they actually primed them to believe or not believe. The people who were primed to believe in free will wanted people to be punished with, let's say, prison sentences twice as long as the people who understood that
or
they didn't
worse,
free will. Yeah,
or
so the free will
worse.
belief just creates so much vengeance and hatred and sadism.
Yeah,
It really is horrible.
yeah.
Yeah, and
Plus, they wanted the prisons to be bare basic and, you know, harshest conditions possible, like no heating, only a bucket to piss in,
And
and
it hurts society. It hurts society because, like, one of the programs we've experimented with here in the United States is like to educate prisoners, to allow them to graduate from college and stuff. And then some people will don't want that to happen, because they're saying, well, criminals shouldn't get an education if, like, some people can't. Not realizing that if you educate the criminals, if you don't blame them for becoming criminals, when they get out, they're not going to resort to crime again. Everybody will benefit.
yeah, it's so logical, but people don't see that because they're blinded by this free will based hatred.
hmm. I mean, a lot of
Yeah,
people don't realise that
let,
having a criminal record could be punishment enough. I mean, because if you have a criminal record, that makes you less likely to be able to get a job, because if an employer sees that you got a criminal record, they might think, hold on a second, I don't want to hire this person because he might hurt, some of my staff members. So people tend to forget these things. They seem to forget that punishment can come in many different forms, not just prison. Yeah.
Yeah, guys, we're a little over 30 minutes, so I probably need to end this one, but this has been a very good talk. So,
Yeah.
so, okay, you've been listening to Free Will, Science, and Religion with Chandler Klebs, David Joseph, Jamie Soden, and George Ortega, and we got onto a whole bunch of different topics as usual, but all very free will related. So, see you next time.